good morning or good evening, whichever part of the day it is. We've already did the morning, right? All right, well, here we are back on our study. If you remember last week, we made it through one slide. Now, there were a whole bunch of questions on that slide that we discussed, so at least we're doing some talking and getting somewhere. But now we want to kind of move into the lesson itself. And, I want to share with you probably one of the illustrations I found years ago. I've used this in sermons, so you can shoot me if you heard it before. But this is just one of my favorite ones about an atheist. Here it goes like this. There's an atheist. He's walking through the woods, and he's thinking to himself how wonderful all these accidents are that happen. The beautiful tree, the river that's running, and all of these things. And the next thing he knows, there's a 7-foot bear chasing him down. And he, of course, starts running away like anyone would. And he turns back and he looks, and the bear's getting closer. And he tries to run a little faster, and he, gets a couple more steps. But right before the bear is about to get him, he kind of falls down on his knees and he says, "Help me, God." And God comes to him, actually. Everything pauses for a minute. The bear's in midair, ready to pounce. And God says to him, "Why would I help you now when you've been doing nothing but going around and teaching people against me?" And he says, "Well, just this one time." And he says, "Well, I'll tell you what. I'll answer your prayers in one way." And the next thing you know, time starts moving again. Everything's happening. And the bear falls down on his knees and begins to pray. And he says, "Thank you, God, for this food, this meal I'm about to partake in." To me, it's so blind to be an atheist, to not have something to believe in. And anyone that goes around and tries to tell you that it's not faith to believe in atheism, you're crazy. Because it's exactly that. They stand on things that are not even facts. They're theories that have not been proved. When they're proved wrong, they just add more time to the timeline and say, "Oh, well, let's just add more because, it just needed more time to create nothing or something out of nothing." Now, let's see, there we go. Oh, that's right. Did it get? There we go. Okay. Next one, actually. That's where we were. All right, Psalms 33, 6 through 9. There's a lot of passages in the Bible that talk about God and his creation. And the fact that it was God who did it, that it was him that spoke it into place. I mean, you can go back to Genesis, but here in Psalms 33, 6 through 9, "By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. He gathers the waters of the sea together as a heap. He lays up the deep in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spoke, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast." Now, something I think that I mentioned last week, but if not, I think if I did, it's something that I think could be mentioned again. It's just the simple fact that first off, I guess I'll ask this. When you look at the book of Genesis, particularly the first 12 chapters, before we go into the life of Abraham, Noah, the flood, creation, all of those things that happen, do you look at that as facts? Do you look at it as some will try to say, "Oh, see, this is poetic language in the Bible that God is using"? I don't know how anyone could come up with that, because when you look at it, it is not designed like poetic writings that we see in the scriptures. But the problem is, if Genesis 1 is right, then God is right. And God's creation is right, and therefore it messes with the people that don't want to believe in God or have been led astray by that. But with that being said, one of the things as Christians we need to be very careful with is giving the other side even a little bit of room to move. And what I mean by that, you can take, and I'll tell you, you can go look it up if you want, but you go look at Genesis chapter 1, and you go online, you type, "What does Genesis 1 say?" or, something along that line, and I'll tell you what, you're going to get all kinds of things. You're going to get things where people are like, "Well, this is just a picturesque story that, kind of talks about," but it doesn't have to be that way. But unfortunately, Christians, we've given ground to the other side. at times. Well, you're right. Maybe God created everything, but he did it, as some would say, with an evolutionary process. Well, I'm sorry, but that takes away power from my God. It does. If he had to create, I mean, he could have done it any way he wanted, but speaking it into existence in its perfect form, that sure sounds like a creative God rather than one that says, we'll put some things over here and we'll see what happens. But you see passages such as Psalms, and we have to, like I said, we have to be very careful to not give room where our faith is. We need to look at Genesis 1. I believe Genesis chapter 1 is history. I think from verse 1 all the way down to the end, I think that's history. Matter of fact, I think from Genesis chapter 1 to 12 is history. You know, the flood of Noah, that's history. That happened. Those things happened. Now, I got a text earlier this week, and it came from Cindy, actually. She sent it because she's seen an article, and there is a place down in Texas, and I believe it's like Dinosaur Park or Dinosaur. It's like a national, because they have found so many fossils of dinosaurs in this area, and you may even have heard of dinosaur footprints being in the ground, and that's one of the places down there where you can actually find dinosaur footprints in some areas and human footprints, and they're in the same rock. Now, the article she sent me was just about that river. It's, you know, there's droughts all over America, and so this river, and it has done this before. It dries up, and it rages. It just depends. But even more have showed up because it had dried out. And I mean, it's really neat to see some of these pictures. I bet it would be really cool to be there and see these dinosaur footprints in the ground. And it's limestone, so it's solid. It fossilized to an extent. I mean, there's not really something there it was the ground that did. But very, very interesting. And to me, the more I study things and history and look at things, to me, I see God even more. But let's look at some of our other stuff here. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, first off, for there to be an understanding of this as a Christian, anyhow, if I'm going to teach somebody about creation rather than evolution, I'm not necessarily going to pick up my Bible and take them to Genesis chapter 1 and say, here, read this. Because if you're talking to someone who doesn't necessarily believe in the Bible yet, that's a step that you need to go. Obviously, talking to Christians, let's talk about Genesis 1. We've read that. We know what it's about. But obviously, you would not want to do that with someone that maybe isn't familiar with the Bible. You want to obviously teach them in a way that they realize the Bible is God's Word. And then we can use some of those things. Remember, as I said, there's some theories out there. Some will say, they'll use the language from the New Testament that 1 year is like 1,000 years to God, or 1 day. I'm sorry, 1 day is like 1,000 years to God, and so therefore, every one of these days, couldn't it have been 1,000 years? Well, I think we talked about the word yom a little bit last week, and how that word represents a single 24-hour day. Now, Eric had referenced one period, I forget what passage it was, where they use it. What's that? Genesis 2, yeah. Where it's used in a different format. But anywhere else, and not to mention, when it's mentioned in Exodus, he's using the same word. And there's no doubt in my mind what God's talking about is one physical week, right? Because if it wasn't one physical week, wouldn't the Sabbath be like every 6 months or every 10 years, or instead of it being on that last day, that seventh day? Jesus himself said, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? That's another hot topic in our world today, isn't it? Is somebody a male or a female? What makes them a male or a female? I did watch a movie recently, not a documentary actually. You might have heard of it, but it's actually called What is a Woman? I watched this documentary. It's quite interesting, and it's also scary because this guy went around and was actually talking to doctors, and especially the one who was a pediatrician that is pushing hormone treatments for kids that are, And it's just, but I'd say, I'll tell you what, it's an eye-opener, for one, if you want to check that out, just to know what types of things people are trying to do. But we know God, he made them male and female in the very beginning. Now, when it comes down to what it is that we can, decipher, what it is that we stand on. To me, it's kind of exactly like everything God has told us before. We have a choice. We can serve God. We can be Christians and be partakers of the blood of Christ. Or we can be slaves of sin. Slaves of righteousness or slaves of sin. And really, in this game, I don't think there's any other option. There was either a designer that created this earth, or it evolved from nothing. I mean, there's really, I don't know how anyone else could, well, I guess there are some that will say we were just seeded here by aliens, so you could go that route, but then I say, well, where'd they come from? So there still has to be a beginning somewhere. Someone has to be created. So it comes down to those two things, was there a design? Was there a creator? And hopefully as we go through some more of the things that we're looking at through this study, hopefully we'll bring those things out of how important it is to see these things. Now, there's a law of biogenesis, and that, just simply means that life comes from life. I mean, that's as simple as what that really means. But you also look at the idea that, if life comes from life, there's an order to it. And we know that God made them male and female. So we do see that. And Genesis 1:24, then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creatures according to its kind. Cattle and creeping things, beasts of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. That is a very important word there, kind. It's something that we need to understand. You can look at a couple of things. We talked about macro, and we just briefly touched macro and micro evolution. And my only issue with those things is I don't like to use the word evolution after it because of what people have done to it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with saying that we evolve in some way. So that is the case. But you have macro, which is kind of funny. It has to do with changes that'll happen, and basically one kind could become another kind. But it's specified you can't see these changes happen in a human's lifespan. To me, that goes away from science as it is. You're supposed to be able to see. You're supposed to be able to test. But so we look at that. The macro is that. Now, micro is something that it happens. Microevolution happens. I don't know, to an extent, you could even look at it from this perspective. Your body adapting. But have you ever known somebody that grew up in an area like ours, where there's winters and whatnot, and then they move away and they go somewhere out west or somewhere down south, and they're there for years, and then they come back home and it's wintertime and they can't even handle it. It's colder to them. A friend of mine was telling me, one of his best friends from high school, he moved out to California, and they had just recently moved. Well, actually, it's been about 10 years now. He's been back here. But he said it was hilarious because they went to a football game in September. Now, it can get cold in September, but he said it wasn't cold. It was like 60 degrees. And he said his friend was out there in what looked like a parka. He was free, but what I'm trying to get at is his body had adapted to a different. So there's nothing wrong with that. We see that obviously in the effects of really looking around and seeing that there's I hate to say races because we're all the human race. I mean, that's really the way we should look at it. We're one race. We were created by God, but we don't all look the same because there's so many different options in what God created. And some of those differences that we have may be things like that because someone's living in a hotter climate for a longer period of time, or that's where they're coming from. Now, I also want to look at a couple of quotes here. There's a Dr. Robert Jastrow, he's one of the most quoted scientists today, is an agnostic and an evolutionist, says life began in a warm pool of water and chemicals 4 billion years ago. Now, when he is asked what facts he has, what proof do you have? His answer is, I don't have any. I don't have any proof to what I'm standing on and what I'm saying. Here's another quote here from Dr. Wald of Harvard. He said, to make an organism demands the right substances in the right proportion and in the right arrangement. We do not think that anything more is needed, but that is a problem enough. One has only to contemplate the magnitude of this task. Now, if you stop and you think about that, you know, we have broken it down. We know what the human body's made of, right? We have that idea, and we know what the human body is made of. And we could take all of those things, proteins, whatever amino acids, the things that, you know, build the human, we could put them all in a petri dish. Guess what? Nothing would happen. None of those things would come together. Now, I guess, I don't know, maybe we need to leave it there for 1 billion years. Maybe then it would happen, but I don't think anyone would be around to tell you that that's how that works. Now, you know, the thing about evolution that really, I don't know, it almost makes me laugh. I can remember middle school science class. And one of the subjects that we learned in biology class in, I think that was 9th grade, was spontaneous generation doesn't happen. You know, believe it or not, there were individuals 200, 300 years ago that saw a little mouse in their barn come running out of a hay pile, and they'd say, well, you know, mice must come from hay. Or, you know, let's say you take your favorite steak and you just throw it on the counter and you just leave it there. Well, eventually there's going to be some of those gross little maggots that are going to form on there. Well, there were people that actually thought that meat produced those things. That was what? That spontaneous, you know, here's the steak, it's going to create a completely different organism. You know, and then some smart people came along, and I know the guy that did the meat one, he basically took a container that was opened. He took a container that had like mesh on it where it was open, but they couldn't, you know, nothing could really get in. And then the third one was completely covered. Nothing could affect it at all. It was just sealed. Well, it's amazing that the one that was open started to grow maggots. Even the one that had the opening with the screen type thing on top of it started to get some maggots growing on that. Now, they weren't down inside. But you know what they realized? You guys probably, you don't know where maggots come from, right? They realized that the fly landing on it was what was causing it. But prior to that, people thought this is where it comes from. And those are just a couple of examples. Now, I can remember in science class her basically telling us how ridiculous that was. And then not too long after that, going into the study of evolution. And I just thought, do they not contradict? You're saying it doesn't work here, but if you have 1 billion years, it might. And that's one of the things that kind of, you know, holds some people back. All right. So, actually, I want to jump ahead here. This is another thing, genetic mutation. This is one of the things that they'll try to say, this is what causes evolution. There's mutations. Well, 99.9% of mutations are worthless. I mean, they're a mistake. I mean, that's what a mutation is. Now, you may not think that they were a mistake, but you know the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? I remember watching that show when I was a kid. It's still out. But that's what it was. They were mutated. They became something. Well, they were still the same, but they got bigger. But it's that idea that a mutation is not something that is helpful. 99.9% of the time, it's harmful. We also, you know, according to God, we were all created, male and female, of our own kind. Now, which then leads us to, you know, if there's mutations, and we know there are, There are people that are born sometimes and they have, lack of a better word, deformities. And that is some type of a mutation that happened while they were being developed. But what we realize, and I don't think anyone, well, some people in the world would argue this, but let's say you have a pregnant cat. How about we put a wager out there and we'll all make a bet that, maybe a dog's going to be born, or maybe a fish, or a raccoon. It's the idea that God told us from the beginning. We come after our own kind. Now, some people would say, well, why is there so many different kinds? That's the beautiful thing. That's how God created it. And really, if you think about it, it's the same thing with humans. There's different kinds of humans as well. We're all created by God, but it has to do with some of it. I mean, look at a polar bear. What color is a polar bear? Well, where do they hang out? In the green forest, right? Yeah, in the snow and the ice. What about a black bear? Now, they can be in the snow, but I believe black bears even hibernate once it gets too cold. Yeah, but they're different colors, but they're still the same kind. They may be a black bear and a polar bear, different species, but it's still the same kind. A cat's not going to become a dog, and most importantly, I think, a monkey is not going to become a man. It's not going to happen. It's not the way God created us. What's that? Yeah, you're right. There's so many amazing things in nature, and that's what I kind of want to bring together here. All right, this guy right here, and I want you to, honestly, this could be some homework for you. Go home and pick an animal that you think would be cool to look at, and try to find. Not everyone's going to be an out spotlight and saying, look, this one proves creation. I mean, but you look at something like this, has anyone here ever flown a plane? Okay? No, not flown in a plane, flown a plane. Okay. All right, we got some people here, a couple that have. How important are the instruments on the dash? Altimeter, your speed, especially, and from what I understand, if you've ever flown at nighttime. Nighttime, you could be flying close to the ground and not even know it unless you have that altimeter and know the surroundings. Well, the reason I bring that up is because here's this little bird here, the blackpoll warbler. And I want to tell you a little bit about this bird. It's a very small songbird. It weighs just 12 grams. I mean, how light that is. That's only slightly more than the mass of a new pencil, which is 10 grams. Now, slightly less than the weight of an empty soda can, 15 grams. The point is this, it's tiny. It's a super small bird, and what it can do in its migration pattern is just unbelievable for the size of this thing. So in the winter, they migrate over the Atlantic Ocean from Nova Scotia to northern Colombia or Venezuela. Now, that's South America. You're talking Nova Scotia, that's up in Canada. That's a distance. And notice where I said they fly over the ocean. They're not over land where they can stop and get a snack or, replenish. Now, in a nonstop flight of up to 1,700 miles over the course of 49 to 73 hours. Think about that. Now, this little bird doesn't weigh much of anything. Now, the bird can achieve such an impressive feat because they bulk up before the flight, packing on extra fat to give them the energy they need. They eat as much as possible, in some cases doubling their body mass in fat so that they can fly without needing food or water. Now, some people may say, well, that's not that amazing, but you know what? They're not taught this. It's naturally in them. And if the reason I brought up the airplane is because if you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get where you're going, because it's not like being on the interstate where there's a sign every so many miles that says you're heading this way, you're heading this way. But here this little tiny bird takes that trip. It knows how much to eat. It knows where it's going. And directionally it can, actually think about that for a minute. Think about being out on the ocean, not near land. Would it be very easy to get turned around and not, if the sun's up there, we can figure it out. But it'd be very easy, especially on a cloudy day, to know what direction you're facing. Now, obviously, if you just keep going straight, you're kind of going in there. But it's still that idea of all of these amazing things that this bird, for one, can do, especially being so tiny and so small. Another one that I had mentioned was the giraffe. Now, I don't know about you, but this is a really cool animal, not just because it has a purple tongue. It's really a neat animal. And one of the things that I did not realize until recently, I've used this guy in these types of sermons before, but the evolutionists try to use the giraffe as one of their big animals. And it's all about the neck and how the neck got longer and things like that. But there's some problems with that. Okay, evolution takes time, right? So if evolution takes time, there would be no giraffes left, because they'd all be dead. And I'm going to explain to you why, okay? You see that top picture there of the giraffe? He's got the cool little leg split, and he's getting down to drink some water. Well, the giraffe has a heart that I didn't put this note down. I think it's 3 feet long is what this heart is. It's huge. All right, so imagine that. You got this long neck. You need a pump that's going to get the blood up there, especially going against gravity. Now, let's say the giraffe bends over to get some water. Okay, this is one of the new species. Okay, it hasn't evolved all the way. Guess what? It just blew its brains out. I'm not kidding. Because the pressure, now that it's going with gravity, that blood's just shooting to that brain. But guess what? God created the giraffe to live. There's actually different valves that are in the veins and stuff going up the neck, and it'll actually shut things down. But then also, if you stop and you think, when let's say the brains don't blow out, okay, but he's drinking water and he sees a zebra come by. No big deal. The zebra can come drink water beside me. And then all of a sudden a lion is coming. Well, the giraffe sees the lion. He's not happy about that. He gets up and he takes off and he runs. He gets about 2 or 3 steps. He passes out. The lion begins to eat him, because you know how it is when you bend over and you move too fast. Well, the giraffe also has, I don't know exactly what it's called, but they always describe it as like a sponge that's around the brain. And what it will do is, obviously the pressure's been cut down, but you still need blood to your brain. So it will soak this blood up, so that when the giraffe shoots up, especially if there's a predator coming, there's enough blood in that brain for it to flow, to keep the function going. And that's what I don't understand, because that's the evolutionist's biggest thing, is how the neck evolved. Now, I will tell you this, there's no missing link for the giraffe either. They say they're searching for the missing link of mankind, but if you ever, have you ever heard of Lucy? She is a prehistoric, more like an ape and a bunch of other animals all put together. But anyhow, the reason she's called Lucy is, no joke, the scientists were listening to the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, that's where the name came from. And they got all excited because they have this. Now, when you go down and you find out where they actually found everything, you want to talk the miles in between the little minuscule bones that they found, that they put together and said this was one person. It really is, it's a scary thing. It's like paint a picture and hope you're going to agree with me. Now, another fun little animal that most people probably would say, I don't want that in my house, But it's still a really cool, you've probably seen beetles before, right? Well, this one is the bombardier beetle. And it's super neat, but this beetle would have definitely blown up at some point, trying to evolve to get to where he is, because there is actually, hydrogen peroxide is one of the chemicals that, and it's separate. They're separated in the body. The next one is, and I looked this one up. I'm not exactly sure what this chemical is. It's hydroxyquin, something along that line. But anyhow, when these two chemicals come together, they actually cause an explosion that, comes out the rear end of the beetle. And it's a defense mechanism. And to the point, this beetle is so well designed that, let's say these gases come together too early, because the beetles, as soon as they come together, it's designed to shoot it out. Well, let's say the beetle, something happened, and the chemicals got mixed, and they're in there, and he didn't actually shoot it out. Well, the way it's designed, no matter what, that's where the pressure's going. But not to mention that, there is like around its organs and stuff, there's like a protective membrane or something so that these chemicals cannot hurt the beetle. Now imagine a beetle that evolved. One day it's got hydrogen peroxide floating around in its body, which, we've used hydrogen peroxide, right? It's not really that volatile of something. But you see these two things, and that's what I don't understand. Another great animal that it's not on here, but the woodpecker is another fantastic animal to look at and say, now come on, how could that have happened accidentally? Because if evolution was true, we would have a bunch of birds with brain injuries. Because what would happen is decide he wants to peck on the tree, right? So the first bird starts to do it, and after a million years, something happens and that beak gets longer. But not to mention that, do you know, if you know the biology of one of these birds, they poke a hole in the tree, and you may be thinking, how are you going to get a meal out of that? Well, it has this retractable tongue. I mean, I'm not kidding. I think this is, I'd have to look it up now, but it's got some distance on it. I mean, you see a picture of a woodpecker, you actually see, like on the top part of the head, the tongue just kind of ravels up. Well, this tongue also has a sticky consistency to it. So when it goes down into the tree, if a bug comes near that tongue, it's stuck to the tongue. But there's more. If you have a gluey tongue, you're not going to get much food, right? Because the bugs are all going to stick there. Well, once the tongue goes back in the mouth, there's a substance in there that will break it down so that it can actually eat the insect. But all of these things prove, to me, without a shadow of a doubt, and that's not even looking at the human body. I mean, you look at the eye, you look at other aspects of if you look at the eye, you can compare that to other animals in their eyes too, and really now, of course, evolutionists will say, look at how these animals evolved. Like a dog, right? They can see it in the dark. Cats can see in the dark. That's the way their eyes are made. But we can see all of these things. Now, I've been talking for a really long time because I didn't have questions this time. Is there anyone that has any questions or comments up to this point? Okay. Well, what I'm hoping that you're seeing from this is just something, hopefully we're not having a conscience of faith, but this is just something that hopefully just reinforce or build up our faith a little bit more. But if there is someone that is here that is listening to these things and they're not sure, there's so much more information that you can go through. We're gonna be looking at once we get done with this complete topic, we're going to be looking at really the validity of the Bible. Can I believe the Bible? Is it God's word? And if you ask me, if you take 40 writers, all from different time periods in that long, 1,500 years or 20, my numbers are off now, but it's impossible that there wouldn't be contradictions. You have different people writing the messages throughout the Bible, but yet it still flows together and works. And that's some of the things we're going to be looking at. Is there anyone here that knows of any type of an animal that they think is something that proves evolution or disproves evolution? Well, one thing that I will say, sometimes we look at dinosaurs and we think, man, it's just some big creatures. How could something be that big? I wasn't there, so I don't have a video camera to show this, but there's a lot of theories on, the earth prior to the flood. What we need to realize is we don't live on the same earth that Adam and Eve lived on. I mean, it's the same location, it's the same rock, but, a massive flood throughout the whole earth is going to change all kinds of things. I mean, you stop and you think about it. For one, how were the plants watered before the flood? Yeah, a mist came up. And, and from what I gather, the rainstorm from Noah's flood was probably the first time people may have seen something like that, with rain coming down, that is. But there's just so many other things that we can look at, and hopefully this will open your eyes to be able to talk to others about the Word of God, and especially in this day and age where we have, a world that doesn't want to be a part of God. Not that that's changed. I mean, the world has always been against God. But there's a lot of things that we need to combat ourselves with and be prepared to do. Now, I just want to, just this last slide here. God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1:1. And really, what's that say? God created us. God created every one of us. Genesis 1:26 through 27, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. That's the starting point, really. We need to have faith in God. But sometimes, in order to get that faith, there's other questions that we may have that we have to work around or get more knowledge of so that we can be prepared. But if there's nothing else no other comments or anything tonight, March, sorry? For us? Okay. Oh, okay. So it's basically it's separating them from the mom. Basically, is why that has to fill up. Okay. Yeah, he was throwing. Yeah. So that's why I've heard of that. Someone had, but I never knew that every baby had that. Okay. He said a really big word. Is what it's called. Yeah, and then basically he said, he was just adding to what she said, where it's this hole that's there, and it's basically the separation from the placenta, from the blood flow from the mom, and it's there, and it has to heal up because it's separated. The baby's separating from the mom. And that's why it has to heal up, because then the blood, he's saying, yeah, well, and he said the blood started moving. There you go. Interesting. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, as far as the human body goes, I mean, that's unbelievable what God has designed. I mean, it really is. I mean, how we work and all of those things, and really even the idea of microevolution and how God has created us to be able to make changes or our body to be able to adapt to different things. All right, if nothing else, then we have offered the invitation to anyone here that has come to that realization that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and they want to confess his name and be baptized, or maybe you just are struggling with life. Maybe you need some prayers of encouragement, or maybe you need to rededicate your life. Maybe you need to come forward and say, hey, I need some help to get back on track. But if you're here tonight and you have any need, come forward as we stand and sing this song.